Hi everyone, Stepan here. Sorry for giving away the result in the title, but I just couldn't resist. So in round 6 of the first Creation League, after 5 losses, I was I felt much better than I thought I would. I was actually prepared to fight, and I wanted to play some good games. And I faced a strong international master who has a ton of experience. And I had the white pieces again, which is a good thing. Sometimes there's an odd number of players or teams or whatever, so you get to play the same color twice. Luckily for me, I got to play white again. Now, I was preparing for him extensively. He usually plays the Taimanov Khan type Sicilian setups with e6, or he plays Pirt's modern stuff with g6, d6. I played pawn to e4, and he started with g6. He played the modern. I went d4, bishop g7, and I decided to prepare the main lines for this one, or sort of the main lines. I just wanted to fight in what's supposed to be soundest for white. I wanted a pleasant position. Knight c3, d6, bishop e3, the absolute main line, and here black's two most common are a6 and c6. He played c6, wants to play b5. Now there are several ways to play. Queen d2 is the most common way to play, going for quick queenside castling and allowing b5. But a4 is a very tricky alternative, preventing b5 and playing prophylactically. This variation against the modern simply doesn't allow black to do what he wants to do. And instead of going for active plans, white is first making sure that black cannot go for his active plans. Black plays knight f6, and now another prophylactic move, and pawn to h3. This prevents bishop g4 and knight g4, meaning that my bishop is safe on e3, and that after knight f3 there will be no knight g4 jumps. And after h3 he started thinking for a long time. This is a theoretical position. There have been 200 or 300 games from this position. I was really surprised. But h3 is sort of a new idea, I think. People only started playing it in the last 20 or 30 years, I think. Okay, he continued knight bd7, which is fine. Black can also castle. Knight f3, normal. Castles, bishop e2, normal move. You don't want your bishop on c4, really. And e5. Black has to do something, has to play this pawn break, otherwise he has absolutely no space. Okay, I took that. d5. I don't want my e4 pawn to become too big of a target. I castled, and he plays queen e7. And after queen e7, he already has some threats. The threat is to play knight c5, after which I either have to give up my bishop pair or lose my e4 pawn. Neither of them I really want to do. So I played queen to d3. Queen to d3 has a specific idea in mind. I'm controlling e4, and I want to play queen c4 after knight c5 once he attacks. If I play queen d2, then he simply plays knight c5. Okay, knight c5, queen c4. And here he played knight a6, which is a strange move. I mean, the knight is attacked twice, of course. I think he should go... okay, he cannot really go b6. I mean... Knight a6 is probably the lesser evil move. I mean, since he already did go for this, then knight a6 is the logical follow-up. The problem is that it allows queen to b3. It also has a threat, of course. It's threatening to trap my queen with bishop e6, so I have to be careful. Well, not trap my queen, but give me a lot of headaches, because bishop e6, queen d3, knight c5, I lose a pawn and my position collapses. So I have to play queen b3. The idea is twofold. I'm meeting bishop e6 with bishop c4, so it's a prophylactic move. I'm also putting pressure on b7. Conversely, I'm putting pressure on a6. Okay. This now became a very nice position to play for me. I became really happy. Okay, he played knight c7, has to get the knight out of this hole on a6. I played normal moves, rook fd1, normal. Knight h5. This is a typical Spanish/Italian position where f4 and f5 are big weaknesses, and black has this fianchetto structure, meaning that f5 is defended. White doesn't. In fact, white has played h3, meaning g3 is not easy to play. So I need to bear the f4 square in mind, because if he gets his pieces into f4 and it's not hard with knight e6, I could be in trouble. So I played bishop g5, firstly gaining a tempo on the queen. If the queen goes to e8, I would be very happy, because that blocks rook d8. So he has to play bishop f6. I don't want to trade this bishop, because it's blocked in by his pawn on e5, so I just played bishop h6. He didn't repeat, but if he does repeat, I probably would have to take, because I think I'm slightly better here. I don't want to go for a repetition. I don't want to draw. So if he tries to repeat, I think I have to deviate and use my small advantage. And I did give my knight the e3 square, which is good. Okay, he played rook e8. Whoa, excuse me. He played rook e8. He doesn't want to trade rooks. He wants to defend e5. And now there are issues in his position. There is an issue on b7, there is an issue on f7, and sometimes knight g5 could be a strong threat, sometimes bishop c4 could be a strong threat. It's not that easy to develop this bishop, because he loses 2 pawns. He loses 1 pawn, queen b7, rook b2, and queen a7. And my queen has a nice way into the position via e3. And I just continued bishop c4. This seems to put a lot of pressure on him. Bishop e6. He has to start trading. One of the main ideas of bishop c4 was not to put pressure on f7, it was actually to be able to play knight e2. And after knight e2, I'm double controlling the f4 square. And another thing is, once I play bishop c4, he's sort of forced to play bishop e6. And what happens when he plays bishop e6 is he cannot move the bishop because of f7 in most positions, otherwise the queen is tied down. So he's going to have to trade on c4, which means that h3 is not going to be weak, which means that g3 can be played, which means that even if the knight comes to e6, so for example bishop c4, queen c4, knight e6, g3, I'm double defending or overprotecting f4, I don't have to give up my bishop, and my only weakness has been dealt with. That's why I played bishop c4 and knight e2. So again, he has to trade because he has to get the knight into play, and he has to release the pressure on h3. So bishop c4, queen c4, knight e6, and g3. And now my position is safe. I have a very good bishop on h6. g5 is never a threat. I'm always in time to play h4. My rook is good on the d file. My knights are fine. I don't really see an issue. I could even consider something like b4, a4, b5, trying to break the structure, but I think it's too soon for something like that. And I have to decide whether I want my knight on c3 coming into the position, or if I still wanted to control d4. I don't want to play c3 controlling the d4 square, because then my knight sort of doesn't have squares. And yeah, there's a lot of pressure on him, so he decided to play queen c5, which I understand. The problem is, e4 isn't really a weakness, because I can defend it several times. I don't want to move my queen, of course, so I take, knight takes, and now simply knight c3. And now it becomes clear that white's position is just good. Why is that? Firstly, my knight is better than his bishop, or my bishop is better than his bishop, simply because I have a pawn on e4 and he has a pawn on e5. If I had a light-squared bishop, then it would have been much easier to play for him. The second problem is this knight is undefended, therefore he cannot challenge the d file. So if he plays rook e d8, I would take it, he would have to take with the bishop. Why would he have to take with the bishop? If he takes with the rook, I have bishop e3, winning a pawn if the knight moves, winning the a7 pawn, or forcing b6, doubling his pawns and having a very pleasant endgame. So if he plays rook e d8 and takes with the bishop, I can win e5. If he takes with the rook, I can either win the knight, win an a7, or double his c pawns. All of that is very good. And rook a to d8, which he played in the game, simply cannot be played. So it's not clear how he should continue. I think bishop g7 should be best. Just trying to trade off that bishop, force my bishop back. Where once I played bishop e3, and he moves the knight into e6, I can get in rook d7, fine. But at least he's not losing a pawn. In the game he played rook a d8, and now my heart started beating so loudly, I think he may have heard me. I mean, this is a strategically much better endgame for white. This is a straight out blunder. It's just a blunder, which once I played bishop e3 instantly, he sort of held on to his head and started going, oh. And on a high level, black should be losing this position. And this is not my usual exaggeration of the evaluation. It's really hard to play for black. So again, if you move the knight, I'm going to take the a7 pawn. So what do? He played b6, which is the only move. And now takes, rook d1. He cannot trade rooks. He cannot play rook b8. e5 is still a weakness. And I have a very easy plan to pick up all of his pawns. So why can't he play rook b8? If rook b8, then simply rook d6. Takes on b2, rook takes c6, rook takes c2. I can throw in rook c8 just to dislodge the king, and now knight b5. All of these are weaknesses. If he plays a6, then knight d6, and his position is falling apart. This is just great. Also, I'm threatening to win the bishop. So he has to move the bishop or move the king or something, because I can play g4, knight e8 check. So that's why he couldn't play rook b8. We actually discussed this position after the game, and I said maybe rook b8 was better. He said no, that's just losing. And I know, but I think what he did in the game is even worse. Rook d1. It's just, why is this worse? Well, knight takes, and here, and I pick up the e5 pawn. He doesn't have time to defend. Okay, takes, starts getting his knight into play. Again, if he plays bishop g7 and f6, I just go g4, and I can, well, I actually don't go g4. Let's see. Okay, bishop to g7, knight e3, and f6. Yeah, I can just go knight c4 and start picking up the queenside pawns. And his knight is not in play. I don't have to play g4. I can just leave the knight here. So this is even worse. But after this, he played the logical knight g7 and now knight e3. Now, obviously, he doesn't have time to move the bishop and play f6. He plays knight e6, knight g4, bishop g7. And now I just win a pawn. I just have to make sure I don't take with the f knight. If I play knight fe5, then he plays h5 and wins a piece. So knight g5. c4 only move, getting in knight c5, threatening the e4 pawn and the a4 pawn, and also threatening bishop to b2. So I have two choices. I can take on c6 or on c4. If I take on c6, this becomes tricky. Knight c5, I probably go a5, he plays bishop b2. This seemed messier than the game. So I took on c4. And after knight c5, I played knight fe5, trying to block in the bishop, preventing bishop b2, and preparing to take on c6. And of course, if he takes on e4, he is not attacking my b2 pawn twice, so knight e4 wouldn't be good. Knight a4 is better because after for example, knight c6, he can play knight b2. And that's a reduction of material, which I don't want to allow, so b3. And after b3, knight b6, I spent a lot of time. If you saw my game against Nenad Mrkonjic, where I lost in the endgame, in which I was completely equal, then you know how I felt, and then you must realize that I spent all my energy to make sure that doesn't happen again. So I definitely didn't want to mess up. Now there are two options. If I take on b6, he takes on e5, of course, because if he takes on b6, then this is just over. So takes on e5, and now I go knight c8. He goes a6 probably, knight e7, king g7, knight c6, and this seemed reasonable. This seemed okay, but I thought his position would be easier than after what I did in the game. That was a strategic mistake. I just misassessed the position. This was actually easier than what happened in the game, so I should have gone for this. In the game, after knight b6, I played knight c6, knight c4, bc4, a6, and e5. And this I calculated before knight c6. I thought, okay, if I play e5, his bishop is blocked. First, if I play something like king f1, then bishop c3. And he queens this one, I queen this one. For example, c5, a5, knight a7, I have to prevent the pawn from queening, a4, knight b5, bishop b2, c6. He cannot play a3, so this should be winning. But I couldn't visualize everything correctly, and I thought, okay, maybe I missed some detail. And e5 is just cleaner, because this prevents bishop to c3. And if bishop c3 is prevented, then it takes him a ton of time to get his king to d7. And once he does get his king to d7, I have knight b8, winning the a6 pawn, which means that before playing king d7, which he has to do because, of course, d8 and e7 are covered, before playing king d7, attacking my knight, he has to defend the a5 square with the bishop, meaning bishop f8 and then somewhere, and he has to play a5. So e5 actually gives me a ton of time, because even though it seems his king can come to d7 quickly, it cannot come to d7 yet. Before it comes to d7, he has to play bishop to, for example, c3 or d2 or e1, and then a5. Okay, bishop f8, king f1, bishop c5, king e2, king f8, f4, I don't want to lose a pawn. And now one of the patterns which you're going to be seeing is bishop here, and after g4, bishop to g3, forking my two pawns. And this is something I had to consider at all times. King e8, again, king d7 is not possible yet. King to d3, bishop to b6. Now, again, king d7 wasn't possible. He has to play a5 still. King c3, a5. Now king d7 is a threat. Okay. And in this position, if I play a normal move, like king to b3, then king d7, of course, I don't have any other options but to play c5, which I actually intended to play. Has to play bishop c5, knight a5, but the problem is bishop f2, and g4, bishop g3, f5, bishop e5. This should be winning, but there's a chance for a draw, which I just didn't want to allow. It could just happen that he trades off all the pawns and is able to sacrifice the bishop for the last one. So instead, I calculated again for about 20 minutes and calculated all the options. And the only thing I have to do, and this may sound complicated, is play knight d4, knight b3, knight c1, knight d3. Once I get my knight to d3, and it defends the c5 square, then all of these squares are covered, and his king has no way into the position, and all I have to do is push g4 to make sure this square is covered, and that's it. I just win. If I manage to play knight d4, knight b3, knight c1, knight d3, I'm controlling his passed pawn, his king has no way into the position, and I win. So after calculating everything, I mean, the plan was easy to find. If I could magically put my knight on d3, then game over. The plan was easy to find, but I had to calculate all the variations, and I did, thankfully, correctly. So I play g4. Now, all the nonsense with bishop f2 simply doesn't work. And after king to d7, I go knight d4. If the knight is taken, the pawn endgame is just winning. He has no time to support his pawn, and I have two passed pawns, one here and one here. So he plays h5. I can just ignore that. If I take, there could be complications, so I don't have to take. I just continue with my plan, knight b3. He threw in hg, doesn't matter, a4, knight c1, I continue with my plan. Bishop a5, king b2, controlling the a pawn, bishop b4, and knight to d3. And this is it. That's it. This is my setup. There is nothing black could do from this position. He just has no way in. He played bishop to e7. I played f5. The next part of my plan is get the pawn to f6 to make sure I can just play e6 and create a queen. Gf5, gf5, king c6, c3, bishop f8, f6, and now he cannot move his bishop away from the control of the f8 square because e6 and f8 equals queen in 3 moves. He cannot move his king anywhere because he cannot move his king anywhere. I don't know what to suggest. There's nothing to suggest. He tried king d7. I went c5, king c6. The pawn cannot be taken. I just went c4. Let me show you. If he takes, then takes and takes and e6. This is the pattern, and I just queen. So I played c4, preventing king d5 and king b5. He played bishop h6. I played king a3, Bishop g5, I took, bishop d2, and I'm just going to do this, pick up this pawn and queen, bishop g5, king c2, and here he resigned. Finally, I didn't mess up the endgame. I got a good position, and I actually spent an hour and a half after I won the pawn to make sure I don't blunder, and I calculated everything 10 times, and I calculated correctly. I defeated an international master for the first time, and it made me very happy. I was ecstatic after this game. And the tournament became much easier to play. There was huge relief because I didn't just come as the lowest rated player who obviously doesn't deserve to be there and lose all of my games. I actually did manage to win a game. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.